All right, so we are excited to present a second panel of the day about some more some more ways that people are practicing Stoicism in very practical and tangible ways in their lives, how they're engaging with Stoicism in a civic capacity. And here to moderate that panel is our friend Gregory Lopez, who is the founder of New York City Stoics, co-founder and board member of the Stoic Fellowship, member of the Modern Stoicism team, and a co-host of Stoic Camp New York. He is also co-author of a handbook for new Stoics, which is known in the UK as Live Like a Stoic, and of Beyond Stoicism, which is known in the UK as Live Like a Philosopher. He is also politically active in New York State. So, Greg, thank you so much for being here today, and we really appreciate all the panelists who are here with you.
And thank you for the great introduction, Brittany, and thank you for putting this all together. And thank you, Phil, as well, for running the usual tight ship of Stoicon. So I appreciate it. So we are here to discuss civic engagement in action. And we have 4 panelists with us today who I'm going to introduce, then ask a few questions. And if we have the time, we will also be taking a couple of questions from the audience that are selected from chat and will be passed along to me. So first, I'd like to introduce the panelists, and then we'll go through each question one by one. The first panelist I'd like to introduce is Meredith Alexandra Kunz. She's a writer and communications leader in Silicon Valley. She also speaks and writes on practical philosophy at the Stoic Mom on Substack. Her book Beyond Stoicism was published earlier this year. Next up, I'd like to introduce Allie Nava, who is the author of the survival adventure July and Everything After, which was named the first Horizon Award finalist. She also has been an invited speaker at author events, universities, company and board retreats, and more. Next up, we have Leonidas Konstantakos, who is an international relations theorist, specializing in Stoicism as well as just war theory. He teaches at Florida International University, Miami-Dade College, and at Archimedean Schools. He is the co-author of Being Better and is currently working on a new book on Stoicism and justice in conflict. Finally, I'd like to introduce Ross Payton. Ross is a former counter-extremism practitioner and a national security master's graduate from King's College London. Stoicism has helped Ross in his job, relationship, and in managing the challenges which come with being neurodivergent. So, welcome to our 4 panelists. I'd like to start off the conversation by asking each of you one at a time a few questions, and I'm going to start with the basics. So, we're here to explore civic engagement. So this term civic has been explored a little bit throughout this conference so far. It comes from a Latin word that means things that pertain to the citizen, the town, or the city. But like Stoicism, as things travel through time, they may transform and mean different things to different people. The point of having 4 different panelists on board today is to try to see how each of us can engage civically through following some examples which are fairly diverse in the application of civic engagement. So to start off, I would like to start with Meredith and ask you the first question, and then we'll rotate through the other 3 panelists as well. The first question is, what kind of civic work do you do? And what do you think makes it quote unquote civic in the first place? So Meredith, would you like to take a stab at that?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Greg, and thank you for being here with us today. For me, civic is something that can improve your community and the where you live and the people you live among. And my civic work has focused on volunteering with kids and teens and with adults. But a lot of the work I did was, and still do, was to work with educating and helping kids become leaders and also become people who then also give back and work in their own communities. So I served as a Girl Scout leader for about 10 years total. And in that time, I helped girls in 2 different troops become leaders themselves. A major principle of that organization is it's meant to be girl-led. So I empowered these young students, starting from first graders, to really learn to teach each other and to learn from each other and to figure out how to explore the root causes of problems in the community and figure out some kind of way to take action and help. And the girls did work on a lot of things where they were able to actually help educate their peers about healthy eating, bike safety, pedestrian safety. And I also volunteered for an anti-bullying program called Project Cornerstone, which for which I taught in local elementary and middle schools. And we had some principles that were actually really close to Stoic principles about kind of having the courage to stand up for others. So they called it be an upstander. And not taking the bait is another one. We read books to the kids about this. And it was about, don't get angry at other people. Instead, express the virtues essentially, but just using different words. And another gap that I saw was arts education in public schools. And I know how much that can enrich young people's lives. So I volunteered as an art and music teacher as well. And this was while I was working at jobs, but I felt it was really important. I will say I also continue this past week. I volunteered to help teens at the local high school by doing a volunteer job shadowing at my office for 4 high schoolers who, I just shared my job with them. I introduced them to 7 of my coworkers who talked about their roles in research science and engineering. And it wasn't just tactical, like, here's what we do, but it was really about how to express the virtues at work and how to kind of be the best person you can be in any work environment. How to, as they say, soft skills of communication and expressing your curiosity, working with others, and so on. And I'll just say one other thing, which is I also volunteer with adults. So I am a coach, and I offer coaching for people's work in their careers, in their lives. I do much of that as a volunteer, and I have a Substack, the Stoic Mom Substack. I put that in the chat, which I view largely as a community service for other people who are on this journey of raising kids and helping families. And then most recently, Greg and I published a book, which of course a book is also a commodity, but we did it because we felt that we'd like people to be exposed to ways that they can better their lives. There are practical exercises that Greg wrote that help people think about how to live better. And, I continue to do this. I formed a podcast as well, The Philosopher's Compass. Again, not to monetize Stoicism, but to kind of share the lessons that we use to create our own sense of meaning and purpose. I think this has been important to my kids because they now volunteer. They've been tutoring. They do a lot of work in the community to teach others and to bring some kind of improvement to their world. So hopefully role modeling that is an important part of this too.
Great. Thank you very much, Meredith. So I'd just like to highlight that the word volunteer came up quite a bit in what Meredith said. And so for people kind of thinking about civic engagement, volunteerism is one way to get involved. And Meredith displayed a whole diverse ways in which she volunteered. And so thinking about how you could possibly fit your own life and skills into volunteerism could be one way to go, but we are going to see other ways as well, although everybody will probably bring their own life experience into it. And I suspect that is true of Allie. So I'll turn to you next, Allie, and ask you the same question. What kind of civic work do you do, and what do you think makes it civic in the first place?
Yeah, so thank you for asking. Like Meredith, volunteerism has been a very big and important part of my life, my whole life since K through 12 years. And there's really, 2 sort of big things I've tried to do on the civic side. A lot of it because the country I was originally born in that country, myself and my family, we had experienced a lot of political violence. And so when we were able to come to the US and actually become US citizens, I personally felt a lot of gratitude for the opportunity to be in a country where we weren't going to be persecuted for who we are or for having opinions or even for volunteering in the community and doing things. So I wanted to give back in some way. And sometime after college, I had an opportunity getting together with several other people to start a nonpartisan civic education and service organization. That was the first thing I did. And we focused for more than a decade, actually. And there's a lot of things happening now that have been sort of offshoots of that. We focused on helping to integrate certain immigrant communities into US civic life. So a lot of our activities focused on everything from voter registration to organizing events where people could meet their local politicians or state level politicians and get educated about legislation and how it affects them. We put together different types of programs where they could learn about how to become more involved in civics and community service and taking leadership roles in the community. And we had put together a youth mentoring program because a lot of the immigrant youths that were coming up in the country wanted to figure out ways to get involved in their communities as well. And so we were hoping to provide some sort of a bridge and provide that education. And I'm happy to elaborate more about that for anyone that's interested. There's a whole host of very detailed programs that we did, and at one point, well, actually, for many years, we had a number of politicians at the state, local, and federal levels consulting with us as well because of the broad reach we had nationally with these immigrant communities. And they would come and sort of engage with us to get connected to those communities. So that was sort of an interesting after effect of starting that effort. And then really the second thing I've tried to really focus on, especially more recently, is writing to share ideas behind Stoicism as well as Eastern philosophy. I've personally been very affected by both, and I tend to read a lot of Stoic philosophy as well as an Eastern philosophy that's called Vedanta philosophy, which is based on texts from back around 7,000 to 2000 BC. And there's a lot of parallels and commonality between the philosophical principles in those texts as well as what you will find in Stoic texts. So I do a lot of writing in that arena as well on Substack. But so primarily, those have been the two ways, and I try to stay engaged as a citizen and try to help other people get informed as well as an independent.
Thank you, Allie. So it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's the famous phrase from Marcus Aurelius that was summarized as the obstacle is the way. And it seems that you have encountered some obstacles over the course of your life, but have kind of turned this into civic engagement. And more generally, when things happen due to fate and chance, it was possible sometimes to kind of transform that into civic engagement, which is another thing people in the audience can possibly take home from Allie's story. So thank you again, Allie. I'm going to turn next to Leonidas and ask you the same question, which is what kind of civic work do you do? And what do you think makes it civic in the first place?
Okay, hello everyone. My own civic work is I'm involved as a professor and at FIU and Miami-Dade, but these last 4 years I've also been involved at Archimedean Schools, which is the only public charter school that teaches philosophy as a mandatory class from 5th grade all the way to 12th grade. So I'm very lucky to be able to work on that curriculum and teaching there. One of the other things that I focus on is that intersection between Stoicism and international relations, mostly as a theorist, but what I look at is historical examples as well as Stoics who have been able to influence their societies or have traveled to other places in other cities to impose or help with the curriculum, help with institutions, incorporating Stoic cosmopolitan into the institutions of other cultures to have a more just world. And one of the things that I've been looking at in particular is the Stoic conception of justice, which, as you all know, for the Stoics, justice is not something found necessarily in institutions or out there in the world. Justice is a character trait. So even in the anarchic or chaotic world order, so we can still try to be just, and hopefully we can try to achieve that measure of justice in our own characters, in our lives, and come this much closer to having a good character and being happy, right?
Thank you. So it sounds like overall you're applying some of your expertise and especially skills in education to a broad audience of various different stripes. And so probably you are quite skilled in that, and bringing your own strengths to the audience and focusing on philosophy is possibly one thing that people in the audience can take away if they're thinking about engaging civically. Finally, I'd like to ask Ross the same question. So, what do you do in for civic work, and what do you think makes it civic in the first place?
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so I've worked in preventative counterterrorism for about 7 years or so now, and that's something which I think is civic, partially because of the way in which it's caring about the community in the way that it's preventative, because we're not sort of on the front line, as in sort of with the police stopping terrorism on a daily basis in that sense, but we are sort of in the community trying to sort of take away the roots of this. And that's something which is sort of really rewarding and has been over time. But also, I sort of founded a company about sort of 4 years or so, which was dedicated to raising awareness of the voices of people with lived experience, survivors of terrorism themselves. And that's been something which has allowed me to go back to the practitioner world of sort of colleagues in the police and other areas and actually show them and maintain the relevance of individuals who have been directly affected by terrorism. Because in my sort of day-to-day job, it was clear that increasingly that was something that unfortunately wasn't at the forefront of everyone's mind, as it can be, sort of in the day-to-day when you're in the bureaucracy of government and all these things. But actually connecting those practitioners with people who have the lived experience to practically talk about the issues that have affected them in relation to terrorism was something that was so important, because it brought it back to what it is and sort of why it matters to prevent it. And I think that's had sort of quite a wide scale impact on my colleagues as well. So it's been very rewarding. And yeah, there's been lots of crossover with Stoicism, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Great. Thank you, Ross. So it sounds like prevention and kind of civic engagement can be about as preventing harm to others as well as possibly healing trauma when it occurs, which is something that stood out to me from your introduction. So thank you again, Ross. So let's move on to the second question I have prepared concerning how Stoicism feeds into your civic engagement. So some of us are Stoics first and then are driven to get involved civically, and some of us are involved civically and then come upon Stoicism. So I'm curious of each of your journeys of involving the intersection of Stoicism and civic engagement. And I have a specific question, and I'll start with Leonidas first on this, which is, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the Stoicism or the civic engagement come first? And how do they interact, and how do they, more importantly, how do they also make you persist through the kind of civic engagement that you do?
Thank you, Greg. I think, like most of us, I found Stoicism as a way to deal with my things in my own personal life. Right? For me, it was coming back from 2 tours in the Iraq War. So I used Stoicism to get me through probably the worst of that. And then I've noticed that it was so much more to Stoicism than just how to get myself through the worst moments of my life. Stoicism is nothing if not a social philosophy. So learning how to retrain yourself to thinking about more than just, okay, now I've gotten through the worst part of my life thanks to Stoicism. Now, how do I follow those other aspects of Stoicism that deal with becoming doing your proper functions or your appropriate actions? How do you do that? Because that is the next level, as it were, of Stoicism, right? We often just stay with, oh, there are things in my control and things not in my control, and we have to draw that line and accept the things that are not in our control. But that was day one of Stoicism in the classroom of the ancient Stoics. You come in, you learn that, and then we go on to performing your kathekonta and becoming and progressing, becoming a prokopton towards sagehood, right? So do it for that. That was level one for me. And then I started going back to school, and Stoicism helped me think, okay, if it helped me get through this, what else can it help me with in terms of my experiences in the war and so on? And I went on just getting degree after degree. And finally, I fell in love with this intersection between Stoicism and just war theory, because so often about just war theory relies on institutions, about conventions. And I realized that the Stoics would have said, like, the only thing you really control is your own thoughts and your actions. So you can try to be a just person, even when there's no hope of achieving justice outside as an institution or between nations in an anarchic world, right? So I think that for me, that was I paraphrased Marcus in my studies and in my life for much of that in this quest to if you have to live in a chaotic world, why do you have to be chaotic yourself? We can choose to be orderly even in an anarchic world. So that's what did it for me.
Thank you, Leo. So that is a very great example of the kind of resilience to civic pipeline that Epictetus, in my view, kind of demonstrates. That I view the three disciplines as presented, though it's not explicitly stated, as a progressive discipline. And so you start with the discipline of desire, which is resilience and healing, but then ultimately you do that in the service of action and civic engagement. So thank you for that example. Ross, I'd like to turn to you next and ask you the same question. So, did Stoicism help you choose the kind of work that you ultimately engaged in, or did Stoicism come later? And also, how does it help you maintain with your civic engagement?
Well, Stoicism came later, as I think is the case for many people. Stoicism came to me through when I was going through quite a challenging period in my life, and it really sort of allowed me to have a framework for navigating that in a way that was extremely helpful and useful, but not just in the practical sense, but I think also in the ethical and moral sense, which I think is sort of too often sort of forgotten online, if I'm being frank as well. But I think more generally, with with the way in which sort of Stoicism has sort of fed into civic engagement, I think for me, civic engagement has been something that came first, and then Stoicism really helped to hone that and to sort of really streamline it in a more positive direction. Because as I mentioned with my work, it's sort of, especially at the beginning when I first started the initial role in the area that I work in, counterterrorism, it was so challenging to sort of make decisions very, very quickly that were quite complex and were really consequential. But then having that framework allowed me to really understand what mattered and to sort of fast track decisions. Also, in terms of the practical details around civic engagement came first, and the Stoicism really helped to shape it in a more positive direction.
Great. Thank you very much, Ross. I think the connection may have been a little fuzzy, but things rapidly sped up and we did get to hear most of it. I don't know if there's anything that could be done about that, but just wanted to inform you, and not sure if my experience reflected others. But next, but thank you for kind of showing the route, and the fact that civic engagement can indeed come first is an interesting thing to note, that one could be engaged civilly before getting into Stoicism. So next I'd like to turn to Allie and ask you the same question, which is, did Stoicism help you choose the kind of work that you are currently engaged with, and how does it help you persist in that work currently?
Yeah, so for me, Stoicism did come first at two very distinct points in my life. The first was as a child, my father had actually studied under Aaron Beck's methods back in the 70s. And so he had really integrated all of those ideas around separating perception and judgment from facts, as well as the dichotomy of control, into not only his day-to-day work with his patients, but it was very much the way he even dealt with us as a family. And there was also a big focus on civics and volunteerism in the family. And so that was sort of the underlying foundation in the family. And so it sort of led us into volunteerism that would include everything from healthcare to civics. But then later in life, I more consciously as an adult came back to Stoicism, especially Marcus Aurelius, who for me is a big role model, because I find that his focus on a combination of gratitude and work ethic and duty, and his focus on being charitable along with that duty is sort of those actually for me are guiding principles when I'm engaging in anything, be it sort of at work as a leader or in the volunteer world. And I find that those are great, actually, guiding principles. And somebody had even asked, like, how do you leverage Stoicism, or how do you focus on these things when you're dealing or facing extreme violence or terrorism? And I would just answer that question by saying, it's sort of part of your question, Greg, is that honestly, the idea of dichotomy of control is a really big component in sort of dealing with that and being able to go about doing one's work. So just really continuing to remember what's in your control, what can you do, and sort of forgetting other people's opinions and judgments, and then also, of course, continuing to try to have that charitable attitude no matter what somebody else is doing, and not abandoning our own values, which, again, goes back to the Stoic virtues of courage and justice.
Thank you, Allie. So this notion of duty as a guiding principle is important, and Leo brought it up in the Greek earlier. Or appropriate action is perhaps a less stodgy translation, but that is one of the, if not the guiding principle of Epictetus's second discipline, the discipline of action, which is directly related to civic engagement, which we're talking about now. So thank you for highlighting duty and how it guides you, Allie. Finally, I'd like to turn to Meredith and ask the same question. What kind did Stoicism help you choose what you did, or were you already engaged civically? And also, how does it help you persist in your civic engagement today?
Yeah, so like others, I started my civic engagement before I adopted Stoicism, but it aligned really well because when I discovered modern Stoicism, I realized it was super well matched to a lot of what I'd already been trying to do or aspired to do. But it kind of gave me a grounding and what I felt was a more solid philosophical structure for what I was doing. And sort of it elevated the importance of what I was doing. In like some of those groups I mentioned going into the schools, I wasn't just a random person or just a random mom going to do this. I did it with sort of a higher purpose and a higher meaning, because I think that that makes it so it feels more valuable to you as a person engaging in it. But I think you also bring maybe a little bit more importance to the work itself. And my goal was to collaborate with other people to make our community and our world better for all of us, using the virtues as our guide. So kind of it fit perfectly with when I started to practice Stoicism. One reason I do love Stoicism is our common humanity is at the core of it. And the interrelationships of all human beings are really critical, which means we have a responsibility to help each other and lift each other up. Like you just mentioned, kind of this idea of duty. And for me, kids are really important in this effort, not just because I have two kids and have focused on that a lot with my thinking and writing, but also because they have the potential to become good citizens. They are not born knowing all this in terms of Stoic virtues and wisdom, justice, courage, self-control. They have to really be taught a lot of things, and some of them can't come till sort of the age of reason. But you can start introducing things at a young age to kids. And when you work with young people, you're teaching them how to build their own character. So you're kind of building your character in the virtues, and then you're teaching them how to do it, how to create a culture of respect, fairness, caring, mutual support through their service projects or through just how they act on the playground. And that's inviting kids to really make a difference as well, which I think also elevates their behavior in their own minds. It's not just, oh, I'm standing up for another kid because I feel like it. It's because they have a reason to do it that's really in keeping with their ethics and their values and how they want to live as a person in this world. So I just think it's very important to kind of start that young with people, because I think in those formative years it can really take root. But even if not, we're all patients in the same hospital with no doctor around helping to find each other some cures and remedies. That's to paraphrase Seneca, and I think about it a lot because we really are all in this together. And I want to say one other note on that is, as if you go with that approach, you may find you're forming your own community of volunteers, that people you meet along the way, people you can become friends with, maybe even long-term friends with, because you're making common cause together, and you are bringing the kind of spirit that you want to see in others, and then they're bringing it back. So it can be really, those circles of concern can become more expressed as you make more friends and connections in this world of civic engagement. And, you can then see the impact of your work, which can keep you motivated along with this community of people.
Thank you, Meredith. So bringing up that aspect of intentionality and teaching kids to kind of have reasons for doing things as opposed to simply being good or being bad is a key aspect of Stoic ethics. And that's one of the things that Epictetus highlights in the second discipline, the discipline of action, is having a good reason. And what makes something appropriate in the first place is that one can explain why you're doing it. And hopefully that explanation is for the good of society overall. So thank you for that. I'd like to go to the third question, and then we're going to open it up to some questions from the audience and perhaps open it up to the panelists as well for things that we haven't covered yet. So I'm going to ask the third question first to Ross, and I want to ask you, what is one piece of advice that you would pass along to a Stoic who's not currently civically engaged, but would like to be?
Excellent question. I think it's often the case that especially sort of young men of the age I was when I discovered Stoicism, you can sort of lean into it in a way where you think it's more individualistic. Whereas personally, I know from my own experience, I think the more I looked at Stoicism, the more I realized that wasn't the case, and that actually it had a really strong communalist and sort of civically responsible component to it. And so I think what I would say, especially to someone who is in my position, would be to understand sort of what Marcus Aurelius talks about when he says that that which sort of brings no benefit to the hive brings no benefit to the bee, and that we're all intrinsically connected, and there is this interconnectedness. And it's important to view us societally in that way. And that works in reverse too, in that if you take care of yourself as an individual, you're giving yourself the capacity to take care of others. And I think that's a really beautiful and sort of wholesome way to look at sort of personal development, is that you develop so that you can help others. And to me, that's been sort of a huge component of sort of Stoicism for me as it's developed, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you, Ross. So in short, it sounds like overall trying to really understand our interconnectedness so it could be applied is the main piece of advice that Ross gives. So thank you for that, Ross. Next, I'm going to go to Allie and ask you the same question, which is, what is one piece of advice that you would pass along to a Stoic who's not currently civically engaged but would like to be?
Yeah, I would say two things really quickly. One is that it's really, it can be as simple as how we treat our fellow neighbor, our fellow man, which is something that William Stevens brought up earlier. It could be as simple as voting. It doesn't have to be some big or time-consuming act. So our everyday actions can actually be a part of being engaged civically. And then the second thing is, I think to the extent that, you know, any of us are parents, I'm a mother, exposing the children and the next generation to the guiding principles through exposing them to some of the readings of, say, Marcus Aurelius or Seneca or Epictetus. I think that could actually be a powerful way to help bring some of these ideas and inspiration to the next generation as well. That's actually something I did with my own children, and so that's also another piece of advice or an observation I would offer that could actually be impactful for many years to come.
Thank you for that, Allie. So overall, the main pieces of advice are that these civic engagements do not have to be grand acts, and that parenting is a useful way in order to engage civically as well. And parenting can come naturally and is a grand act of sorts, but not of the Cato kind that get written in the history books necessarily. So it's nice to keep that in mind. Thank you again, Allie. Next, I'd like to ask Meredith the same question. So what would be one piece of advice that you would pass along to somebody in the audience who is not civically engaged, but may like to be?
Sure. I'd say start by picking something you care a lot about, and figure out how you could use some of your best skills to help somehow. I think everyone has something, some sort of problem or issue or something that they care about, and something that kind of really bugs you or gets under your skin and that you'd really like to see change. It could be extremely local. I often point to the example of one of my daughter's Girl Scout award projects started with the fact that we can't cross the street here to get out of our road into the neighborhood without almost getting hit by speeding cars. And unfortunately, there have been deadly accidents in our neighborhood involving children. So we wanted a crosswalk, and the city wouldn't do it. They said there weren't enough people crossing there per day to actually put it in. So my daughter and some of her Girl Scout members started an education campaign and really tried to use her own interest actually in filmmaking to create short films about it with other scouts, in which then the local public safety officers agreed to share out to the community. I mean, it's a small act, but we couldn't actually do the act we wanted to do, which we thought could help more people. But because of that barrier there, we kind of worked around it. And she was able to bring skills that she also really enjoyed using and that brought together her group to start to educate people a little bit more so that they could be more safe. And so I think, that is a way to tackle a problem. I would also say, like, don't stop if you encounter a barrier, like something that you couldn't do. Okay, what else could we do? And I think we could all do that. I mean, I go back to like what I mentioned about kids weren't learning art and music in school, and I want to do something about it. I was lucky that there was an existing curriculum I could draw from and just kind of volunteer to teach in the classrooms, which was great. Same thing with the anti-bullying. Like, having been to grade school with some overbearing kids and mean kids myself, I wanted today's kids to be kinder to each other and to care about, being fair to one another and express the virtues, as I would call them today. So doing that, it was an existing program too, and being able to really proactively bring it into classrooms. I didn't have to make it up completely from scratch, but I was able to put my effort and work into something that I think really made a difference. I mean, kids still talk about it, and they're now in high school, or some of them are even college, of the ones I taught. So the other thing I just wanted to say is you don't have to be perfect to go out there and do something. As a volunteer or as someone working in civic engagement, you might make a mistake or get really frustrated. You will have to tolerate stuff that you don't really like. And this goes back to what our earlier speakers shared about tolerating things that are frustrating or difficult. I remember sometimes it was challenging for me to teach kids who got really restless or really distracted or didn't seem that interested. But I kept going, and I kept like trying to get them interested and doing the best that I could. I think you're still doing a net good, even if you're not perfect.
Great. Thank you, Meredith. And finally, I'm going to turn to Leonidas and ask you the same question. What's one tip that you would give to somebody in the audience who is a Stoic but not civically engaged currently?
Well, as Stoics, I would say you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Look at the principles of the ancients and see how they applied it in their own lives. I mean, you have people like Panelists who tell you that you have up to 4 roles, right? Among them are your cosmic role as a rational human being. You have your own individual role, right? Not everybody's good at the same things. Find out who you are, right? You have your circumstances. You have your career goals, and all these will give you a direction. You have people like Marcus telling himself, remember who you are. Remember that you are Marcus as a member of this community, and don't allow yourself to become Caesarified, right? You have people like Panetius who took this immigrant working class philosophy of the early Stoics, right? They were all immigrants. They were all just, Cleanthes was a boxer, Chrysippus was a long distance runner, and some of these guys had to work at night so to be able to attend philosophy lectures in the day. So he took this working class philosophy and made it and it was able to, as his role as chief priest of Rhodes, go into the elite Roman circles and teach them philosophy. That was his job, his civic job, right? You have people like Sphaerus, who was able to take a Stoic philosophy that he learned from Zeno and Cleanthes and take it down to Sparta and make a Stoic Spartan king to have institutions that were more fair and cosmopolitan. You had people like Perseus who went to tutor Antigonus. You had Blasius, for example, that helped the Gracchi brothers try to reduce the wealth inequality in Rome. He even went on to go help in Pergamon to help start a new city for escaped slaves that would be more fair and live under Stoic principles. So, you might not always agree with people. Like, I mean, you have this cosmic role, but you also have your own individual nature. Look at Seneca and Thrasea, who didn't agree with each other. Thrasea got up and walked out of the Senate for the speech that Nero was giving because he had killed his own mother, right? Excusing himself. And Seneca helped him write that speech. So you have two Stoics on the opposite sides saying, one of them can say, look, I'm not listening to this. This is ridiculous. This is unstoic. And the other one's saying, Thrasea, what are you doing except getting yourself killed? At least when Nero listens to me, the empire is well run, right? So you don't have to agree with everything, but you have to know who you are. And so I think that for those of you out there that want to be more engaged civically, it's important to understand it is relative. It's not arbitrary. There's an objective truth as to what you should do, but it's relative. Not arbitrary, but relative. And you got to find what that is for you, I think, like the Stoics did for them.
Thank you. So that some of what you said ties into what Meredith said in terms of like
Absolutely.
looking to see what is suitable for you, and also not reinventing the wheel, and seeing what opportunities are before you, which Meredith gave some examples and you also elaborated on. So thank you all for that. So we have about 8 minutes left, and I have a series of 3 questions. And so what I'm going to do is just ask, and then any of the panelists can be free to unmute themselves at any specific time if they feel they have something to say, but don't feel obligated if you don't. And this idea that Leonidas brought up earlier about kind of the working class and different things feeds into one of the questions that I received, which is how would you reach out to marginalized communities in order to bring them closer into the cosmopolis? So how would your civic engagement particularly try to help out people who are traditionally marginalized? Feel free to unmute yourself and speak your mind if you'd like.
I guess I can start on this one. It helps if you speak the language. Find out who you are. What were your challenges? And if you're from some of these marginalized communities and you already speak the language in some certain respect, right? Just like the ancient Stoics did. You had Stoic slaves, you had Stoic emperors, and they understood the best way to reach out to their community. And there's different aspects of Stoicism that I think could help. I mean, at the end of the day, we put forth this view of cosmopolitanism, but certainly you have to see that cosmopolitanism from somewhere, right? And understand challenges. Look at Cleanthes. He was a boxer. He probably had a brain damage, right? And he was known as very slow, but that once that information was in there, it was there for good, right? So what happened to him? Eventually, they wanted to give him money, like an award for all the work he'd done, and Zeno wouldn't let him take it, right? He's like, no, it's not for you right now. You might do horrible things with the money, and the money comes with strings attached. So you want to find a way to do this in a way that still stays true to your principles and still true to that community that works. I can't answer that for each individual community, but especially someone who speaks the language and is from that marginalized community will find ways in Stoicism, looking at some of the things these ancient people have done in their own context, I think.
Thanks, Leo. Anybody else want to answer that? If not, I have a couple more questions to tackle.
I had a couple thoughts, Greg. I mean, one thought I have is that, to me, one of the things that helps level the playing field is education. And I think that if you are, no matter where you're growing up, if you can learn and be encouraged to learn and grow at a young age, you'll have more opportunities. So that's one reason why I think teaching and sharing with younger kids and folks is really important. The other thing I would say is mentoring. Anything I could do to, help kids or young people from any backgrounds. One other thing I've done is like mock interviewing, like people who hadn't gone to higher education, but they wanted to look for jobs and they wanted to be taken seriously. They needed to do some practice interviews and see how that they could speak in a professional setting. So just things that you could do that maybe are already part of your world that you can share with others so they could learn and grow. That could be an opportunity right there.
Thanks, Meredith. Anybody else? If not, I do have one more question that I think a few of our panelists can definitely speak to. And this one's from Andy Armitage. And Andy asks, how do you manage your mindset when dealing with such a significant subject as potential terrorism and potentially extreme views?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in on that since I've lived through that. But it doesn't necessarily take living through it to have an idea about that. I think, honestly, I had some great role models in my father and my grandmother who were, I would say, very principled people who did not give up their principles even in the face of corruption and torture. And that is a very difficult thing to do. And so I think one of the ways to think about, what would one do in that type of situation is there is sort of that Stoic exercise of free thinking through how you would handle an extreme situation and what would your response be? And then there's the reality of it. And I find that, again, the dichotomy of control, separating out and figuring out what is in your control and what is not, and then acting on those things that are in your control. That's one thing. And then the other thing is to really understand, your relationship with courage and justice. Like, will you be influenced by corruption and sort of the threat of torture, or will you not be influenced by it? And then the reality is, I think, everyone is human, and there's kind of a threshold. At some point, it will be difficult for people to not abandon their values. And so it's sort of figuring out what is that point for you. And one would hope that we wouldn't abandon our values. And I've been in situations where, you know, we were tortured, and there's really nothing you can do. And by some luck, in my particular case, there was the hand of a stranger that sort of intervened and helped. And that stranger, actually, I would say, was he was the embodiment of Stoic courage and justice. And so it's another opportunity to think through, could we be one of those people? And these types of things happened, they happen in many countries. They continue to happen today. And I think asking ourselves, like, what would we do in those situations? Even if we're not the victim, if we have a chance to help somebody, would we help somebody? Would we stick our neck out? Or what risks would we be willing to take? And it's an honest question to sort of ponder, and there's no right or wrong answer, but it is something worth thinking through.
Thank you for your powerful words and sharing your experience, Allie. If you don't mind, Ross, I would like to call on you and see what you have to say about this question.
Yeah, I'd just like to reinforce what Ali said partially there. I think courage is the virtue to emphasize in this way, because until you're confronted in these situations, it's really difficult to know what any one person would do. So, for example, in my job, I spent a lot of time with people who had far right views, for example, and it was my job to try and bring them away from that. And as part of that, it's very easy to be confronted with someone with views like that and to be just dismissive and to be frankly repulsed in some way. But actually, that's not helpful nor productive in any way. And so it's often about a decision between what's easy and what's actually right in those situations. And the right thing is often more difficult, but it's nonetheless right. And I think equally as well, what is helpful is to lead an individual towards virtue, because I think it's so easy in sort of de-radicalization and the kind of work that I've done previously to let the best be the enemy of the good and say, well, actually, even if I haven't managed to pull this individual totally away from their views, they're now non-violent, and that's virtuous in itself. That's going in the right direction. And so I think having a sense for that too, and understanding that what progress is, and then it isn't necessarily a binary all the time. There's sort of small steps in the right direction are always positive.
Thank you, Ross. So with that, I believe that is the final word because we are at time, but I'd like to thank our four panelists for sharing their wonderful insights, and hopefully people in the audience have found them actionable and found some ways to be more civically engaged and see how diverse civic engagement can look like. So thank you again to the panelists, and thank you for Brittany for pulling them together, and thank you for Phil for running a great show.
Here it is.